I'm excited to jump into this topic of all things off the track thoroughbred with Aubrey tonight. But before we do so, Aubrey, how are you?
Doing great. This is a fun kind of squeezing this in between rides and lessons. I'm actually at a barn where I've started training and they have allowed me to use the office. So I'm like, this is fantastic. We're going to make it work. But doing really good. Thanks.
Well, the office looks great. And yeah, let's start there. I know you just relocated, didn't you? Did you move to a new barn, or tell us a bit about
Oh, good
where life is right now? Tell us about yourself.
I think all I can do for the last couple months is just laugh. I moved from Georgia to New York at the end of June, and then I moved up to a barn that was lovely, but it's a barrel racer barn, and it allowed me to get all my horses up there, but it didn't allow me to have the flexibility I wanted for my horses. So I'm in the process of actually buying my own space and just moved my horses into like last weekend. Moved my horses into a barn in Lansing. And so I'm got 15 or 16 of them there currently, and then I'm training down at the Ithaca Equestrian Center. So made a big move up from Georgia and kind of have restructured how I'm doing things, but still super focused on thoroughbreds, and it's allowing me actually to build that side of things the way I want to, which is great.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on buying your own place. I know that's so exciting and that's such a big undertaking. So we're excited to hear how that is all going, get the update once you're moved in there. So are you planning on being there year round?
Yes, as crazy as that is, I'm going to try to figure out the winner. I've told people it feels a little bit like the Oregon Trail back when, you'd go and you have like, oh, you're leaving with your wife and children and oxen and you're going to ford some rivers and you don't know what's going to happen. And you're like, oh, someone died of diphtheria. Like, what is that? So yeah, that's kind of what the winter feels like right now. I have an indoor, and the barn that I'm at currently sitting in this lovely office has an absolutely stunning indoor that really never gets colder than 40 degrees. So yeah, the goal is to train here through the winter and see how I make it work. And that'll also force me to write a little bit more. So maybe I actually get a leg up on the books that need to happen. So we'll see.
Nice. Well, we'll all benefit from that if you're spending some time working on that. And honestly, if you have an indoor, I feel like, I mean, I grew up in Minnesota riding, and there was some hard days, but it's great. The indoor is fun. Everybody, like the horses, honestly, like the cold air, they get all excited, and I don't know. Hopefully you enjoy it.
It just feels like an adventure right now. It feels kind of like a dumb adventure where you're like, I left the South to move to the North going into winter, but it'll be great. Like, if nothing else, I'll just be like, how did I get here? And I'll be schlepping water buckets from my house down to the barn. So we'll see. It'll be
Fair.
good. Yep.
It's possible. It's possible. Okay. Well, for all of our members who have joined since our last conversation with you, I think it would be helpful to start by setting the table a bit with learning a bit about your background with thoroughbreds. And for anybody listening, as always, feel free to put any questions that you have for Aubrey in the chat, and I will relay those to her. And also check out on the Ride IQ app under the programs tab. So if you go to lessons and then programs, Aubrey has a thoroughbred fundamentals program there that is awesome. So it's kind of like, it starts with the first thing you should do kind of when you get a horse off the track, with like introducing the mounting block and like a lot of groundwork and stuff like that. So definitely be sure to check that out because that's a great resource. And we're going to work with Aubrey to record more thoroughbred content in the near future. So keep an eye out for that. But let's kind of start with learning a bit about you, Aubrey. Can you tell us what inspired you to focus on training thoroughbreds or off the track thoroughbreds, and what it is about the off the track thoroughbred that makes them so special to you?
You'd think for the number of times I've had to or answer some form of similar question, I'd actually get good at making this concise. No, still failing. So basically, I mean, I grew up riding I was born in the 80s, so started riding when I was about 4, and a lot of people had thoroughbreds, and that's what we rode. I'm from Connecticut, and so I got my first thoroughbred when I was 9 after riding a wildly bucking little Welsh pony that taught me how to have a seat and stay on. And then I was utterly fearless and was like, great, this big dark thoroughbred, sure, I'll get on it and ride it. And I fell in love with them there. I mean, I love the brain, their heart, their talent, their athleticism. None of that's ever changed. And as I grew up, I rode anything under the sun. If anyone would let me, throw a leg over, I was like, fantastic. Oh, it rears, no problem. It bucks, whatever. It stops and runs out. And, you know, as I got older, I realized that some of those things you ought to be like, hey, maybe we should call a vet as opposed to just throw a kid on and see what happens. But growing up along those lines, I rode a lot of different horses, a lot of difficult horses. And as I got to, my, actual riding career kind of kicked off as an adult, I've always gone back to the thoroughbred as the ones that I love riding. I got a lot of them because people find them challenging. And so they'd often come through my training programs. I went through, I rode 100 jumpers and eck as a kid. And then I endurance rode through high school because I had a horse that I loved dearly who was a stopper. I went to college, did IEA, and I rode everything under the sun, a lot of thoroughbreds. And after that, I was a working student for a while in Hunterland with a really wonderful hunter trainer, and I am an eventer. So that came in way later. I moved to continued training, moved to Atlanta for my doctorate in anthropology, and realized when I was out at the Atlanta Horse Park, or the Georgia International Horse Park, just outside of Atlanta, that these big jumps in the field looked like things I had jumped on 100 paces as a kid, and that was really fun. So I am the idiot who started eventing by jumping Olympic jumps on some of my friends' horses that could actually clear them. So I was like, oh, look, the Indian mounts to bounce. We'll jump it on a diagonal first to make sure I can clear it, and then we'll bounce it. Like, don't. But so, oh, can you hear me? It did something to, I did something. What did I do? I
Oh, I'm
can't
sorry.
hear.
I was on mute. I apologize. We lost your audio there. As soon as you said, and then we'll bounce it. We lost your audio there for a second.
We did. So, and I found it extremely fun and learned the hard way by starting, jumping at stupid levels I should never have done, young and dumb and all the fun things. And then turned around and was like, what is this sport? And got into it. And really, again, in the process, was still training horses along the way. And most of what was coming in was thoroughbreds. So as I finished my PhD, decided I didn't want to sit in front of a computer for my life, which is what academia pushes you to do more and more at the current rate what the things are going. And so chose kind of intelligently, unintelligently to leave that and train full time. So as I did that again, it was thoroughbreds that kept coming into my barn, and I realized that I got along with them and they made sense to me. And I mean, their brains make sense, their bodies make sense, and the process that they go through all just kind of, I just found the learning to be fascinating. So every time I'm around them, I'm learning something new and being challenged in a new way. And I don't know, at some point when I left academia, I remember my dad going, oh, I can't believe you just did how many years of schooling, and you're going to leave to be a horse trainer, right? And like, and he goes, don't you miss using your brain? And I had to laugh really hard because, be it running your own farm, dealing with thoroughbreds, dealing with horses really of any breed, and just making it all work. I use my brain like nothing ever shuts off, right? You're constantly in pattern recognition, trying to figure things out, understanding them in the field and how that translates to what you have under saddle. So yeah, long answer. Told you I'm not good at answering this question. So eventually I realized that I was struggling to make it up the levels again in eventing. I rode through prelim and then kept getting horses that were kind of getting there and then something would happen, or kind of getting there and something else would happen. And I found it, I was like, oh, this is quite frustrating, but I really do love the lower level work with thoroughbreds. And was like, why don't I just focus on that? And it was this whole like kind of going into a new year of like, what am I going to set my goals for and what am I actually doing in life? And realized I was like, oh, like I've been doing the makeover since 2018. I'm training a ton of thoroughbreds. I love this. Why don't I just build this? And so started focusing on them more and more in training, and pitched to Horse Nation to write a set of articles called Thoroughbred Logic. I had been writing things for them about training for the makeover in the past, and then they had kept me on. So Deanne Sloan, who's fantastic, was like, yeah, oh, yeah, that sounds wonderful. How often do you want to do this? I was like, I'll do it every week. And she's like, okay, you're crazy. But so every week I wake up on Wednesdays at like 5 a.m., write an article, and it goes out by 8:30 to Horse Nation. And I think we've got over about 120 articles at this point. And again, there's no shortage of things to write and or have pictures of, or all of the things. So yeah, did that and then realized that the other challenge with thoroughbreds was not just understanding them and getting them to go well and do well and then helping with sales. And I got into retraining and sales, which I find really fun, but was getting people to be able to ride them well and also be able to understand them. So I had people coming in saying, man, I love this horse, but I'm going to have you sell her for me because I just can't, I don't even know how to stop. I don't know how to use, I pull back, she goes faster. I try to turn and again, we're going faster or something's happening or we're rushing fences. And I realized I was like, oh, well, I could train people by having them lease my horses, but that only gets it a small number. So I started a thing called Thoroughbred School to try to train the riders and increase the equitation goals to be able to ride the thoroughbreds in the way that, growing up in the era that I did, I don't know, I feel like people had to, because you had to ride those horses and there weren't as many options. It was up north, it was Arabs, Morgans, quarter horses, and thoroughbreds. That was really a lot of what we had. So if you wanted to run and jump, a lot of the times that's what you were on. And in some ways, we've moved away from that, and people are lacking some of that. I don't know if it's tact or understanding, or there's just sometimes a hole in education coming up. And I found there's a spot that I could fill that by working with the riders. And really, all it is it's silly. It sounds really, really basic. It's a little bit of the psychology of the horse and then a lot of equitation. And just how to sit in a saddle and use your aids. So anyway, I've now taken up half of the time of this to talk about the background, but yeah, there you have it.
It's so interesting, and I'm really glad you actually provided the whole story, because there's just a lot to unpack there, and I feel like now I and everybody listening will understand kind of where you're coming from with all your answers, because yeah, like a PhD in anthropology is obviously going to, like, it's a different skill set, but like that knowledge base, it can be applied to anything. And so I'm sure that serves you every day, that you have that kind of education and foundation going into working with thoroughbreds. And then just to, like, I can't put a stronger point on how much I respect and how awesome it is that, like, you found your niche, and like you are like completely owning that. And like that is, I think that there needs to be more of that in the American equestrian market. I think it can be hard to go off of the normal path, which everyone, like, the normal path is like we're all just trying to get to the Olympics. And it can be easy to be kind of persuaded to go down that path. But you are so strong on this kind of retraining off the track thoroughbreds aisle or path, that it's really, really cool to see. And we need experts like you to help us to decipher these animals. So we all benefit from it. So thank you for that. Okay. Can you share some of the common misconceptions people have about off the track thoroughbreds, and how you think that kind of the public, the market, can overcome them?
Ooh, this is a really fun question. As you're asking that, I was like, "Ooh, there's this answer and there's that answer. There's a whole bunch of different things, right?" Um, let's start from it's fall, and I'm looking out the window here at some absolutely stunning changing trees, and the temperature's dropping, and there's going to be windy days and things like that. And one of my favorite misconceptions is that thoroughbreds are spooky and that they're flighty. Now they have a really big flight response, but these are some of the bravest horses I sit on. If I'm going to go and ride through a bad storm, or if I'm going to go into, tricky footing on a hunt, things like I want to be on a thoroughbred. They are so, like, they're not spooky, and they've seen so much on the track. I think a lot of what it is that there's a relationship between the rider and the horse, right? And if you tighten up, they respond so much more to it, that it's going to be this assumption that they're spooky. But for years, I mean, fireworks never bugged my horses.
Oh, we can't hear you right now, Aubrey.
Microphone.
We can hear you now.
Apparently, there we go.
We lost you right after fireworks never
Okay.
Bothered my horses.
Yep. So sorry, that's called, my phone doesn't know what to do with this app and an incoming phone call and me trying to get rid of it. But again, these horses they're not bomb proof, certainly, but they've seen so much at the track that I remember when I got my first thoroughbred, like my own, I still thought, I was like, oh, we need to put kid gloves on and like make sure it's only, ride on good days. And I didn't necessarily do that, but kind of thought it and then rode anyway. But realized that these horses they're consistently themselves every day of the week. So every once in a while, there'd be like one that I don't want to get on when it's windy and chilly and be like, maybe I should wait till somebody else is here. But the other 15 in the barn are going to be totally fine. So that's a fun misconception that I think that people forget that they've seen so much at the track. Other things like, oh, it might be hard to get them in trailers, or just treating them like young horses, whereas they have such a, a resume of things that they have already done. I mean, they've hauled all over the country. They've gone to training. They've been under saddle. They know their lead changes. Now, are you going to be able to get them quietly at a slower canter without their hind end engaged? It's up for grabs. But there's already just so much knowledge from the track that translates really well. And I think that was something that I didn't realize until I really started down this path and started going to the backside of the tracks and started to see the way that they were cared for there, the various ways that trainers dealt with them. I realized it wasn't too many years ago that I realized at the track, they not only run left and train right, but they also stand. Like they go and stand and watch. And it's not just the pony horses standing. They ask them to stand in pairs and they trot back in pairs or threes. And so you see them learning to not just run, right, but also have all these other skills that we need in the more day-to-day riding world. So that's really cool. Other things like a thoroughbred should be skinny. Like the expectation that, oh, it's thin, it's a thoroughbred. It's not, I don't think people really say it's a thoroughbred, it should be skinny, but they just kind of write off that it is because of its breed. And feeding them is tricky. Getting it right is hard. I have a feed program that I use that's really pretty specific, but I feed grain, but I don't feed a ton of it. And I use beet pulp and alfalfa cubes and a whole bunch of other things and put it all together. And they tend to keep their weight on really well and put weight on really well. So you don't have to have a thin thoroughbred just because it's a thoroughbred. Often there's a reason, and usually there's a way to fix it. I'm like, oh, where else could we go with this question? But I'll cap it there for a second and let you throw another one in the mix.
No, those are really fun answers. Not obvious answers at all either. Like those are, I've learned from each one of them, which is really cool. Lee is in chat and she's just wanting me to clarify what your PhD is in. Is it in anthropology or did I get that wrong?
No, you're correct. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I look at the way in which humanitarian aid photographs in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo impact the day-to-day lives of the population there who's living in a conflict zone.
Wow.
Totally different than training horses.
Oh my gosh. I couldn't even repeat what you just said. That is unbelievable, Aubrey. Okay. So cool. And Lee, thank you. Lee has a bunch of other really great questions in chat. And I will get there as soon as we start talking about specifics with training. Okay. Sure. What are the first steps you take when transitioning an off the track thoroughbred from racehorse to like a show horse in your barn?
A lot of what I'm doing right now. I just pulled in a couple the other day and I'm teaching them to turn out. So the first thing I want to do is get a handle on who this horse is. It's going to take a day or two. Some of them just walk in the barn like they own the place and they're super easy, but I need to get them on my feed program. So I'm transitioning them. I feed wet. So I need to transition them from dry grain to wet grain to then adding the base, which is the soaked beet pulp and alfalfa cubes. That's one thing. And then I work on turnout. The barn I'm at right now has board fencing. It also has hot wire. It's very safe hot wire, but if these horses haven't seen it before, I want to start them in board fencing. And I get them out with a friend as soon as possible. A lot of people will do a much slower set of introductions, but I found that especially the geldings can handle it really well. The mares, you want to be careful. They're great after about an hour, but there's a lot of kicking sometimes for the first hour. And I'll just start getting them turnout. And then as soon as I have like the two I brought in, I picked up two horses on Sunday evening, one from the track and one had come from Kentucky from the track. So they're both very, very, very recently off the backside. And one walked off the backside and into my barn and was like, what the hell is this? Right. And you're like, okay, you're going to take a second to breathe, make sure they get hay, keep them comfortable. And then the next day I got them out for about 3 hours and made sure I was there to watch them. and then bring them back in. And today they were out for about 7 hours, and I tossed another friend in with them. And I try to match personalities so that they have someone who's going to be calm, but they can also play with and learn from, and not put in, I don't want to put the most aggressive horse in with two new guys who are going to be a little bit, less sure of what they're doing. But another horse that tells them this is the right way to do things tends to help. And then I introduce them to herds, and my geldings are usually out in herds of 4 and 5. So we start getting them into herds. And then I'll do things like, all right, I got to check your brain. Let's do a first ride. So sometimes I'll just skip, if I was taking my time and doing things right, I would do some groundwork, teach them to move their shoulders over, the walk, halt, back, some come here training and trailer training, just to make sure everything's solid. And then I'd spend a lot of time standing on the mounting block while I taught, and have them just hang out and take the energy down a little bit. And then do first rides where you go, okay, we're going to test. We're going to walk, trot, and canter if we can, once we get a leg over. And that ride acts as like a litmus test. Where are they in their training? Some of them come out, they go right over their back. They come into the bridle, and you're like, okay, what we can go from here. And other ones come, they ride like a camel, and they stick their head in the air, and they kind of paddle along. And you're like, all right, so we're going to go back to doing some things about moving shoulders and, figuring out some more steering, and then kind of set a schedule for very slowly filling that foundation. So even if I walk, trot, canter on the first ride, the next I probably won't do that again for a while. That's a test, and I backfill, and I try to get the trot really solid, and then I try to get the walk really solid, and then the canter. Usually in that order, because the walk is hard for thoroughbreds, especially right off the track, and the more you hold them back, the worse it goes. So the trot tends to be where I'll do a lot of the work.
Got it. Okay. And Lee is asking how long after you get the horse off the track before you're getting on for the first time. And is it just different for each horse?
It is. Some of them, usually I want to know what their brain is doing and how their brain works. So if they're not completely losing their mind in the first couple of days, and usually they don't, usually they're super well behaved, and they take a breath and they're like, okay, like I can do that. I'll usually hop on within the first week, and just one ride, like a horse Cove, who I'll be marketing tonight because he's finally put on. He came in really, really, really weedy in the middle of a growth spurt right off the track, and little ulcery. So he was so skinny, I couldn't do anything, but I was like, I can hop on and do a very light ride and see what your brain is. I was like, ooh, I like your brain. It's fantastic. And now we're gonna, have you in a stall and in the field and install in the field for the next, I've had him for 3 months. And so now he's ready to go work. His body's there, his brain's there, all good. But some of them, I can hop on the next week and then slowly go forward. Let down is something with these horses that's really important. And I've said for a while that horses will you'll either give them the letdown or they will take it. So some of them don't need it immediately. It's not something that's like written in stone. A thoroughbred needs 3 months off the track to sit in a field. That might help, but they might not need it at that point, because all of the things that are in their body from the track, all of the muscling, they might get through those 3 months, and that's where they might start getting sore or tired, or getting kind of it's kind of like a culture shock curve, where you go somewhere new and you're like, everything is wonderful and this food is amazing, and then after about 2 months you're like, I want to go home, this sucks, everything's awful. And then you pass another 2 months or whatever, and then you hit the curve where you're like, actually I can deal with this. So you kind of have a letdown curve where you could give it to them in the beginning and it might work. Or some horses like Wolf, his jockey club name is Louisiana Moon. He had to work in the beginning. His feet needed to move. He wasn't happy in turnout. He was not happy in a stall, but he put him to work and he was happy. And he got let down. He took it about 6 months after he came off the track. He was basically laid up for about 3 months, just in a field, hanging out and letting his body then decompress and come back together. So it really, yes, it depends on each horse, but it's not a bad thing to go ahead and hop on right away. And then if your horse will tell you when they need it. And that's not some weird, like, you will hear it in your sleep. No, their body will start to fall apart, right? They will start to get sore. They'll start to drop weight or change shape or not feel as comfortable. And that's when you go, okay, now maybe is when you need some of that time off, where we do a little more groundwork, or we just take it slower. Or their brain will say, this is too much and I can't process it all at once, right? Where they'll start getting a little more frantic, a little harder to ride. And not feel like you're making steps forward, in which case that's, you go, okay, this is your cue that maybe a little bit of time off and a little bit of letdown is a good thing, or just not riding quite as much.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's really good to know that, like, to look out for that. Because I'm sure a lot of people get to that phase and they're like, oh my God, like we're training backwards. Like this is like nothing. And like, you can get really frustrated and it just be
Mhm.
like, what is going wrong? Like this horse that was wonderful yesterday is now having all these issues. And just to know that, like, look out for this. And like, if you were experiencing this, like take a second, take a breath, and like maybe your horse just needs a couple months. Is your standard, like once you do have those signals, is your go-to to be like 3 months, or how do you kind of determine the length?
I just keep an eye on the horse. So unfortunately, that's a lot of this is feel. And I wish
Yeah.
I was more of a science person, but I am such a like feel person with all of it, where you're like, okay, it seems, you watch them in the paddock, you watch their body shape, you watch how they're moving. And at that point, you might need vet interference, right? Some of them, a lot of horses are regularly injected on the track. That's an accepted thing. HISA, the organization that controls what happens on the tracks everywhere except for Mountaineer, um, allows and tracks this. There are a lot of things that can be in their system very legally for racing, that kind of like if we do injections on a horse, that they wear off after about 6 months to a year. So sometimes a horse coming off the track crashes at 6 months because everything that was holding it together is now leaching out of its system and it's having to function without that. And the body doesn't know what to do. So suddenly, again, you got the horse fat, they're doing great, they look fantastic. And suddenly their coat goes dull, they drop weight, and they're struggling physically. That's a good point to have a conversation with a knowledgeable vet who's also not going to panic. And it's just going to be like, great, all right, let's think about what the horse needs to be supported to get from this part of the way their body's changing over the bridge to the next part. Because you don't really get stuck there forever. It just takes a second. Um, yes, I probably went off track on that question, but
No,
there.
that was perfect. I'm learning so much. So when you have a horse that you do decide to let down for when they first arrive, is it kind of like the case of the horse where you said they showed up and they were like thin and like is that the case when you decide to do that, or how do you decide when they're a horse you're going to get on and try to ride for a little bit versus a horse you're going to put out in the pasture for a while?
Again, all of the answers of like, well, you look at them and you kind of go, not today.
Yeah.
But really, body condition is a big thing. Do they look healthy? Are they moving sound? Do they look like they can comfortably carry and do what we're asking, even on these really basic levels of just walk, trot, canter? And 90% of them that I encounter coming off the track are ready for that. They can handle that. And again, keep in mind that like I also function as a reseller, right? So I resell and rehome these horses. And what we do as resellers is a little different because we have to show what the horse is going to be like in the future. So you have to be able to get on relatively early to know their brain, know who to appropriately sell them to, right? Even I've had some very chill horses on the ground, and you get on and you go, oh, you are going to take a very advanced rider, even though they walk around like a golden retriever on the ground. So what that allows me to more appropriately sell the horse, and make sure that they stay safe and the riders stay as safe as possible by matching them up well. But that does mean that I need to get on almost everything earlier to know that. I can't have an answer just from the ground. If it is a forever horse and I am not reselling it, if I put myself in the shoes of your average adult amateur that's buying a thoroughbred for the first time, you just don't have to be in any rush, right? You can give them that time in the field. You can give them time to, you know, hey, we've done 3 months, we've done a bunch of groundwork, we have trust. You can hop on at that point and get going. And then sometimes you get going and it's like, straight full speed to 60, like everything's fantastic and you can get cooking. And sometimes it's a little bit of an up and down, back and forth way of going. And I did that with the first couple that I had, because one got a major injury right after he came home. And so I just did groundwork after groundwork after groundwork. And the other one came in so thin that I was like, I'll hop on and see what he's like, but then we're going to do a lot of this. And the relationship I had with those horses by the time I got on and really was working was completely different than had I just started riding from the get go. And I think groundwork really does a lot of that. and a lot of people really enjoy groundwork for that relationship building aspect. So there's no really wrong answer. If you get on, you're not a bad person for getting on the day the horse gets home from the track and seeing what you've got, making sure, knowing that you're going to probably give them let down at some point. Or it might even be like, oh, for the next 2 months, we're just going to trail ride. That counts as let down too, right? It's not just this pull the shoes and stick them in a field, which caveat, please don't pull their shoes and stick them in a field. Your whole horse is going to fall apart. They're going to be so sore. Some of them can handle it, but most of them actually like those 4 shoes on and they're used to it. So transitioning, if you're going to go barefoot, have a knowledgeable farrier and do it kindly. Again, that's another one of those fun misconceptions that you should just pull the shoes, kick them in the field and let him be a horse for a while and then come back. But that cause a lot of soreness that comes up over their hind end, especially if their angles aren't right. But I can go down a whole nerd rabbit hole with negative palmar angles and things like that. So
I love it. You are so knowledgeable on this. Okay. When you're first getting on those first like couple of weeks, how long are those rides usually?
15 minutes maybe. They're short. Again, I I only use those rides as assessment. I'm not trying to really train anything at that point. I want to know the horse under me. I want to be like, okay, do you steer? So it's kind of like you go down a checklist. You're like, okay, how are you to get on? Right. Okay. And the most dangerous thing you're going to do in that ride is get on the horse. It's that moment when you're swinging your leg over and you haven't gotten the other foot to the other side or the other leg to the other side of the saddle. That is the most dangerous thing that will happen in that ride. Everything else is fine. All right. So you're on. Fantastic. Check the box. Like got on the horse. Does it walk? Does it trot? Does it canter? Does it have both leads? Which shoulder does it drop? It's not, does it drop a shoulder? It's which one. They are often crooked. They don't necessarily know how to steer from your leg to your hand. So they're going to go around, they're going to get a shoulder over here. You're going to scoot that shoulder that way. And you're just assessing and kind of making a plan. And when you do a canter transition, what happens? Right? Do they blast into the transition? Do they step into it? Are you shocked that you have to kick? And you just I just kind of keep a mental set of notes on that, and then you get back on the next time. And you almost want to think about it familiarization, getting to know the thing under you. And then once you're like, I now understand this creature, I've got a good sense of where they're at. I think it's fair for them and me to be riding. Then you start going back to the basics of let's get a good rhythm. How do we get the hind feet hitting the ground at the trot in a way that makes sense? And then how do I start to get them to balance? How do I start to get them a little bit straighter and straighten up the shoulders, and all working towards being able to get them to use their core and come over their back correctly. But it's just those little steps by little steps as you go. And
Yeah.
again, the first weeks are just not, I don't put a lot of stock in it. And if a horse comes out, and this is we're going back to that initial question because I liked it so much. Things that like misconceptions. So thoroughbreds will come out and they'll often, again, be a llama or a camel, stick their head straight up in the air, and they have this god awful choppy trot. A lot of people have said to me, oh, I like that horse. They're wonderful, but I want a better trot. And you're like, okay, that's a post-track trot, right? They just got off the track. Their body's tight. They're not carrying themselves yet. They're not fully stepping under. So don't be surprised when that trot goes from being like a 4 out of 10 to a 7 or an 8 out of 10 over 8 months. As they loosen up and get there, the trot will change. The canter it's going to show what the canter potential is going to be, but the trot can look like absolute trash and then turn around and be, really something quite nice. So I try not to judge in the beginning, especially when the horse doesn't know how to use their body, of what's
Yeah.
actually going to be under you.
Yeah, that's super important. And what ratio, when you're kind of first working with the horses, what ratio is groundwork versus ridden work?
I am better in the saddle than I am on the ground. So, and everybody's going to be a bit different with this. I know a couple other trainers who are similar on that and would rather fix something from the saddle versus on the ground. And I think for me, it depends on what we're trying to work on. So every time I touch the horse, it's groundwork, right? Every time they come out of their stall, every time I'm in the cross ties, every time, like I have my saying for the way I train that is basically enough rope to hang themselves, right? You give them a really long rope and then you set the boundary where you want, and you don't micromanage them up to that point. And so every time you're handling them, I'll walk 4 young thoroughbreds, 2 on my left, 2 on my right, and they're all on loose lines. and we walk in and out of fields in the dark, in the rain, it doesn't matter. And if one of them is a jerk and does something silly, the other three are like, not me, man, that was you, that was dumb. And they just hang out while that one has to get back down the hill or something, because now it's turned itself around, and you're like, well, this is how this works. But if you don't micromanage them, and this is probably the biggest thing with thoroughbreds, you have a hard boundary. You cannot cross this boundary. You cannot bite me. You can't kick me. You can't scoot forward. You can't, right? There's like a whole bunch of things that are the hard boundaries, but a lot of things up to that point are acceptable. And so they start to learn, like, for me, one of my big things is you can't push me with your shoulder. So then, because the horse pushes you with the shoulder, you have to back up. You have to move out of the way. They've pushed you off balance. So, I'll tell them, like, absolutely not. We don't do that. I'll back them up a step and stand, and then I leave them alone. But if they push me with their head, I'll just push their head back. I'm like, that's fine. You're kind of being cute and a little in my space. That's okay. But the shoulder's the hard boundary. And you'll see them kind of work and figure out where that boundary is. And once they get it, you don't have to keep managing them. They know that one thing is going to get me in trouble. Everything else is going to be okay, until they find, oh, there was another boundary there I didn't realize. And so all of that is groundwork at all times. I go in the stall to feed. If they pin their ears and like snake at me, I'm going to make them go stand in the corner of the stall, and I will wait until they put their ears forward. I'll be like, you have to have pretty ears. I'm sorry, you don't get your food until you do that. And I'll just kind of patiently be like, your boundary is you don't get to act aggressive to a human in a stall. And a lot of them come out off the track having been bored and in stalls a lot, with some antics in the stall that you just don't want. So again, that's all ground training. And then, to probably more clearly answer the question, to take them out in a lead rope or a rope halter or whatever and actually do proper concerted groundwork. I might do that one day a week and then hop on another two. So probably I ride double the amount that I do the active groundwork. But if they have an injury or they can't do as much, we do more of that and obviously less of the riding.
Okay, great. And then do you always start in an arena? And what if you don't have a fenced arena? This person is saying, oops.
The last farm I was at had a beautiful indoor, but its outdoor was not fenced, and it was right on, like, you'd go down from the barn down a hill to an arena with a cornfield that drops straight down a mountain to these like beautiful views. And so you're on a hill with like, I don't know. And I was like, first time I got on Neil, his name's Luke's Angel. I don't know how we came up with Neil, but first time I got on him, I was like, this is going to be an entertaining thing. Like, I want to hop on this horse, but I don't want to ride on the indoor because it's a beautiful day in the summer in New York. And I'm just going to go do this. And honestly, they all have been fine. Every single horse that I started at that farm, I started in the outdoor. The only horses I got on in the indoor to check were the horses who were coming to me for training, having already been off the track. Because those ones, I was like, I have no idea what you're going to do. And I was always pleasantly surprised. But the off trackers, they were just like, cornfield, dog rustling in the little swamp next to the arena. Okay. And they were fine. So I think if you're comfortable with it, they'll be comfortable with it. But if you're going to be tight and uncertain and ride defensively, then, get yourself into an arena or a round pen or somewhere that's going to feel safer. And you can haul to, go ahead and haul for your first ride. Again, they're used to hauling new places. It's not, they might be like, oh, wow, this isn't home, but it's not going to be super foreign to them because they did that at all the tracks.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. How do horses end up with you? Are you keeping an eye on like the different horses at the tracks and buying them off the track based off of what you're seeing there, or kind of what is your sourcing mechanism?
My sourcing mechanism is kind of like the rest of my life, is utter chaos. So I have a couple of trainers that I really, really trust and I really like. And I will work with them when they have something come off the track that's lovely. Yes, I will purchase it. When they have something come off the track that needs some assistance, I will also probably help them by taking that horse on. So one of the things fun other misconceptions about race things is people are like, oh, I just need some track connections to go get that nice horse for cheap off the backside of the track. We're still having to pay a fair amount of money for the nice horses, but you get access to the really lovely uphill, big shouldered sound, 17 hand geldings or 16 two-hand gray geldings, because you're also willing to take the smaller mare that has ocellates or the one that needs a knee rehabbed. And so I build these relationships with various race farms and trainers, and then they tend to pitch me horses directly. And they're like, hey, so-and-so is coming off the track. Do you want them? And unfortunately, you have that opportunity to keep that connection. And so you usually have to say yes, unless it's like, I am so full, I don't know what to do. Otherwise, they tend to show up. I allow, like, this sounds really silly because I don't run the rest of my life like this, but I kind of allow serendipity to happen with these horses. When one sells and I'm like, oh, I need to go shopping, I'm not often on like looking at the Facebook posts or things like that. I end up talking to trainers, or usually day of or a day later, somebody messages me and it's like, do you want this horse? And I'm like, I don't know who you are, but okay, like, we can have a conversation. So I get a bunch of them that way. But I am on the backside of, like, I'm up at Finger Lakes and I'm connected closely with a bunch of the really wonderful volunteers for Finger Lakes Finest. So they go and they take photos and video of every horse that's coming off the backside that's not going to be personally sold, and they help resell them. And so that's a really fun page to follow, and you get some really nice horses from the track there. So we see them, I'll look at jog video and I look at confirmation photos. And then I take a look at their Equibase and I get to nerd out on all of the things in the Equibase about so if you guys don't know, Equibase is a site that you can type the horse's name, jockey club name in, and it'll tell you everything about their races, everything about their workouts, their auction history, their breeding, their pedigree, their dosage profile, which I'm a nerd and I like to look at to see how uphill build the horse is probably going to be, or how good they're going to be as an eventer versus perhaps being good as a barrel racer. Numbers. I don't do numbers for much in life, but this thing makes a graph, and it's like, that's fantastic. I can follow dosage profile. So everything's on Equibase. So I'll read through that, and then I look for patterns, and you look for holes where a horse maybe didn't race for half a year, and then you have to ask the question, why? Sometimes you can get answers to those questions. Sometimes there's an injury. Sometimes a trainer was sick and just didn't run their horses for that period of time. Sometimes you'll get true stories. Sometimes you get stories that are convenient and the horse still had an injury or something was wrong. But again, by buying from reputable sources that I know and have a relationship with, I've had really good luck with when something has come up. I mean, the trainers have done the absolute right thing. We found a screw in a mare's ankle at one point on a PPE. It had healed a fracture from when she was a long yearling, so coming into her 2-year-old year. And I had no idea it was there. She had been perfectly sound on a beautiful gray mare. And the buyer was obviously shocked. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I promised I wasn't lying to you about a screw in an ankle. But we were taking hoof rads. We weren't even looking at the ankle. And we caught it. And I was like, what? So I got in touch with the trainer who had sold me the horse. And they were like, we are so sorry. We forgot to mention it. She's never been unsound on it. We'll buy her back. We'll pay your board and we'll ship her home if you need to. And I was like, no, 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 no. It's fine. I just didn't I needed to know if you guys knew or what the story was that provided the whole story. And so some of these trainers are so reputable. And obviously it made no difference. I just had to disclose that the screw was there to be able to sell her in the future once we found it by accident. So yeah, stuff like that happens, which is always entertaining.
Wow. Wow. That is wild. Okay. So for the people who are going and trying to source an off the track thoroughbred through one of these programs, like the Finger Lakes Finest or any of these, what do you recommend people look for? Like you meant like they could go through the Equibase, they could kind of read through that data. Are there different attributes of like how the horse walks or different things that you are like, or brain questions that you ask, or what do you kind of recommend they do?
Definitely do a pre-purchase exam. If so, I don't all of us resellers, I would say probably almost none of us pre-purchase the horses that we buy. So we'll just look at the jog video and you get pretty good at identifying lameness. And then you look at the conformation and you look for, you look at how comfortable they look in their body. You look at straight legs, you look at tendons. And if someone's not comfortable doing that on their own, then having a vet do that for them is fantastic. Now that's difficult from the backside of the track because people will not necessarily hold the horse. Some trainers will, but some trainers will just, cash talks, and whoever gets there first with money gets the horse. But if you can't do a PPE, I would show jog video and confirmation photos to a vet. Pay your local vet, pay somebody that you know, to be able to put eyes on that, and somebody who knows thoroughbreds, because track tight is not the same as lame, right? Having tight muscles, kind of like you or I go and play a big game of soccer or something I never have done, but go for a long run, and then the next day you're going to expect that you aren't going to move as normal. But that's very different than, say, having had a major ACL surgery or knee surgery or something in the past and having that show up as sore when you're out jogging. So get someone knowledgeable, take a look at the information, and then ask questions, but recognize that the trainers know, sometimes they only know so much. And their time is super valuable. So the amateur trying to buy these horses that wants to ask 1,047 questions about, how much of a good boy is so and so, you're going to have to move a little faster than that. If you want to ask those questions, then go through a rehomer, because they've had the time to assess the horse for its second career, not just have it try to move it out of its first career. And I think that hinge point is really important. And there's a handful of really wonderful rehomers out there. And we're all, like, for the majority of it, we're all friends, and everybody is in this together in a way, which is really, it's an odd little community, but it's a really wonderful one where everybody's in it for the horse. So if we can get a good read on the horse, we can place the horse where the horse is going to be happy, and that allows the humans to be happy, which means the horse is safe. And
Yeah.
that little equation is why most of that community works the way they do. So if buying fast and loose and being willing to then work with your vet later to fix a bunch of stuff or understand a bunch of stuff that you didn't know was there, if that makes you uncomfortable, then that's the pay difference between getting a horse for 2,000 on the backside or 5,500 from a rehomer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. Okay, so we talked about misconceptions. Are there any common mistakes that you see riders make when they're working with off the track thoroughbreds?
Ooh, yes, plenty. And it's not to say I don't make them too, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes is that people want these horses to go slow right away. And so they get them behind the leg and they have them do kind of a shuffle trot or this tiny slow trot. And forward is safe. The biggest thing, like, I can't tell people that more. I mean, I rode a horse today that I couldn't get in front of my leg, and we were all over the place. And I was just like, I just need to go forward, right? Forward is your safest place. If you are in front of the leg, if the horse is in front of the leg and you are moving forward, the trot's going to be too fast for a while. And, like, too fast is something you just get. It's not scrambling. There's a very big difference between too big and too fast and scrambling and off balance. And knowing where that line is a really important thing as a rider, that your horse, sometimes you have to really kick and really go to get that horse out in front of your leg. And you'll see that in a lot of the videos when people are buying horses. It looks like the horses are trotting too quick. But that's where they get in front of the leg and are safe. If you bring the horse along and try to keep them slow, try to do too much walk work, too much where you're trying to get a frame too fast without actually engaging that hind end by pushing them forward, the horses get sour, they get balky, they start to nap, they'll start to buck or rear. You get a lot of the issues that are just taken out by just riding forward. And then light contact. If you pull, it means faster, right? Like the heavy contact on the bit generally translates to go faster, and pitching forward translates to go faster. So a lot of the things people do to try to slow down, especially when they're nervous, actually gets these horses ramped up. So sit up, use your core. Most of these horses have a half halt. It might not be one you're used to, but it comes right through the thigh up into the body, and you don't have to pull usually too much to get them to come back and come together. So a couple quick things.
Love that. And we got a follow-up question on the dosage profile. she's wondering if you have an article about the dosage profile and kind of what that is, how to find it.
You know what? I got to write one for tomorrow morning, so maybe I should do that.
Perfect.
But basically, the dosage profile is a set of 5 numbers, and in really like dumbing it down extraordinarily, because I understand it on a dumbed down version, is the numbers each correspond to sires who produced really good racehorses and were really good themselves, but produced really good offspring in certain types of races. So short sprint races is the first number. The second number is going to be your mid distance between the sprint and the classic 6 furlongs. Then you're going to go over towards longer races that are going to be kind of your 2 mile races, and then your steeplechase and your 4 mile races on the right. So if you think about a graph, it doesn't matter how high the numbers are, it matters the shape of the graph, because the numbers correspond, and the height, whether it's a number 2 or a number 12 doesn't really matter if it's 00200 or 771277, right? It makes the same graph. The bigger numbers just mean they're more directly related to those older sires. So the newer breeding is going to be smaller numbers. And you look at the shape of the graph, most American thoroughbreds are bred to have a dosage profile that's slightly slightly based to the left and pretty high in that middle number. But if you get a horse that's got like 7 for the first number and all zeros, it's probably going to be a relatively downhill horse who's going to be broad chested and a hell of a sprinter. Those are great barrel horses. Sometimes they're great polo horses, or just more level. Your more uphill horses come as you get more center distribution. And the right side of the graph rarely hits in the US because we don't really breed timber horses and 4 mile racehorses anymore. Um, but if you see those like big steeplechase horses, you're going to have a big jumping, big shoulder, long running horse on that right hand side that a lot of eventers often are really after. So you can kind of start to play with the disciplines. Some of the horses shock you and have nothing to do. They blow the dosage out of the water, and you're like, yeah, no, it's the most uphill going fancy dressage horse, but it might have a distribution that I would have thought it would have been a barrel horse. But it's fun to play with, and I like to look at those things, including and the pedigrees, and with all the horses I meet, and just take a glance at it to just try to add to kind of my mental database of how that works.
Yeah, it's just another data point to take into
Yeah.
account as you're making these decisions. That is so interesting though. Like, yeah, I've never heard of that. Would definitely love if you wrote an article about that so we could all learn a bit more about it. Or even do like a Rad IQ hack chat on it and we can learn about it that way as well. Okay, so somehow we are already here on the hour, which feels impossible. This has flown by because you have just taught us so much, Aubrey, and cannot thank you enough for taking all of this time to share your expertise with us. Because your expertise, like really, it is phenomenal. Just like how deep your understanding of thoroughbreds is, and how you've just devoted your life to being great partners for them. So, really cool. What kind of as a sign off question. Um, what for you is kind of the most rewarding part of working with thoroughbreds and what keeps you passionate about this work?
Ooh, that is a fantastic question. I think it's pretty much every day their heart and desire to work with you and how smart they are at learning the things. These horses love to work. Um, it's not every breed and every horse that you get on that wants to do the job that's asked. They want to figure it out. They don't like to get confused because they don't like to get the answer wrong. They're kind of like they're a lot like my high school or not high school, my college students when I was teaching at Emory. They all wanted to get the A, right? And if you confused them and then they didn't get the answer right, they were always really upset about that. But if you made it really clear and you gave them adequate space to do it and reward and made it clear that it was also fun for them, like they love what they do, and what they do can be so diverse, right? Whether it's running barrels or doing trail or eventing or doing straight dressage or I mean, like they can do all of that. So watching them learn, watching them figure it out, and then enjoying that process, that's like these horses carry so much joy with them, and they're so animated and they have so much to share, and they're so expressive that when you get it right and when you get it wrong, and that's probably the great thing with it. But yeah, I think really their heart and drive to work and to work with people is what keeps me doing this day in and day out.
I love that. Well, they're lucky to have you, and it's so, so cool. And I mean, we need to have you back on soon because we have so many more questions for you, and I could talk to you for hours more. So thank you so much for doing this. I know you have to jump to more lessons this evening, I think you said, which is wild. You are so busy. But thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, everybody who submitted questions, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
And thanks, Rad IQ. You guys rock. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Bye, guys. That's it. Aubrey,
All right.
you are a machine. It is incredible how like you just like you're the easiest person to interview of all time. Like, can we do this every
You're the
week?
easiest interviewer. Like,
oh my God. I swear you just carried that. It was incredible. And you shared so many like actionable insights, which is just like so, so useful. So thank you so much. I know you're getting settled in and have a lot going on. Whenever you do have a second to work with us on a couple of these new initiatives, we'd love
Yep.
to work with you on them. So just shoot me a
No,
note.
very happy to. I just got, so the funny thing is now I'm doing this on my phone in somebody else's office. But I finally just got internet set up this morning in my house. This is the first time
Amazing.
I've had internet, like actual internet, since June.
That,
So
whoa.
I've been
How do you survive?